What is the strangest thing you've seen that you cannot explain? Fall 2009. I was sick, like super sick. It was a few weeks before my amputation, and I was battling a severe bone infection. I was hopped on all kinds of antibiotics. I had a PICC line and would dose my antibiotics through these little balls and pain medication. I'm a huge Yankee fan, so my best friend got us tickets for the ALCS game at Yankee Stadium. She pushed me around the stadium in a wheelchair with a sheet of blankets on me. It was freezing, just to put a smile on my face. My friend leaves the seats to go get some hot dogs and stuff. This is where it gets weird. As soon as she leaves, to my recollection, an older Irish gentleman sits by me. He offers me some of his spiked hot chocolate, but I said no thanks, and explained that I was on a lot of medication. We begin talking, and I told to him what was going on with my life. He asked if I was scared to have my leg amputated, and I told him that I was. I was really frightened of the unknown. He gave me some pretty valuable life advice and comforted me. He assured me that it would be fine. He told me that, if you have to be an amputee, try to be the best damn amputee that there is. My friend comes back with food and asks who I was talking to. There's no one next to me. I guess I must hallucinated this, but IDK, it felt more like some kind of angel or being that came to me to let me know it would be okay. I guess my guardian angel is an Irishman with spiked hot chocolate eater. Not sure if this makes it more creepy or not, but the Yankees were playing the Angels in that series. I was driving home from work on the back roads and was driving behind a car that was the same make, model, and year of my car, just a different color. Further down the road, we both get into the turn lane to turn left onto a long straight road with open fields on either side. The car in front of me turns onto this road and I wait for a car to pass and then turn as well. It takes less than 5 seconds. However, when I turn onto the road, the car that had been driving in front of me was nowhere to be seen. This road has no turn-offs, and it's long and straight, so you can see pretty far ahead of you. The car had just vanished, and I still think about it today. I have a dash cam now, but I wish I had had one back then, because I question what actually happened that day. Edit, I'm 100% sure the car didn't do a U-turn. The roads are really narrow, so they wouldn't have been able to complete the U-turn without having to make it a 3-point turn, or drive partly in the field. I also would noticed, because while there was enough time to complete a 90-degree turn in front of the car that was coming from the other direction, there was nowhere near enough time to complete a 180-degree turn without either causing a wreck or something. After I turned onto this road and noticed the car was no longer in front of me, I looked all around me and could see the other car driving away behind me, but the car that looked like mine was nowhere to be seen. There was nowhere on that road where the car could pulled off, or I would have seen it. It was still very light outside, around 6:30 in June, and the road was surrounded by cotton fields, I believe, which do not grow high enough to cover a car. I have gone through every possible explanation and there just isn't a logical one. Not sure this counts. I was in it, but wasn't happening to me. Pull into a fast food drive-thru in Odessa, Texas. My first time there. My turn at the speaker, and I place my order. It's been a long drive, so I'm treating myself and being a little picky, asking nicely and building a customized meal. Cashier listens and says again, "You ate all that already?" Me, huh. Cashier, oh, I'm sorry. Someone who sounds just like you was just through here, placed the exact same order. Me, hey, cool. Weird, but cool. I get to the window and the girl looks at me with this exasperated expression, opens the window, and says it is you. Me. Cashier calls her manager over and points at me, shows him the order, says nothing. Manager, welcome back. Was there a problem with your order? Me, no, I haven't gotten it yet. Manager, clearly confused, I made your order myself. Cashier points at time on receipt. Manager blinks and says that's the same order to her, looks at me, back at her, and says and that's him. Cashier, I said the same thing. Both of them looked genuinely upset and confused. It got worse when I told them I had never been in Odessa before. As the manager was handing me my food, he laughed and visibly relaxed. The other guy had long hair, he explained, pointing to my cap, like, halfway down his back. You just have a twin, I guess, with the same kind of car. His face when I took off my hat and showed him long hair. They might have been messing with me for fun. Shifts get long and people are creative. But if it was a game they deserved careers in theater because they looked terrified. Yes, I looked around for copies of my car or self while I was in town. Nada. Edit. Whoa and wow. Thanks for the awards. No way I can keep up with all of this. Was 1992. Drove about 8 hours. No drugs or alcohol involved. Oh, and my hair was under my backward baseball cap and tucked under a flannel long sleeve shirt. Not impossible to see, and the angle from the drive-thru window might have helped to hurt. Dunno. When I was young, my parents and I relocated across the country to Maine. We lived in a very small town and our house was old, beat up and on many acres deep in the forest. It had 2 stories, with the top story being the main level and the bottom story being the bedroom level. My bedroom had several large windows that looked out into the forest. I don't remember having curtains or blinds, but I'm sure I must have, because my mother never forgot details like that when decorating my bedrooms as a child. But I must have left them open one night. I remember waking up in darkness, with a faint glowing orb of light hovering just outside my window. I watched it in utter terror as it went slowly across one window, and then the next, before pausing, flashing briefly into my bedroom, before shifting into the third and final window and disappearing altogether. I was so upset by the ordeal that I went and woke my parents up, and my stepfather stormed the backyard with his gun in hand. There was nothing, and no sign of the strange orb. My eyes are watering as I write this. Deep down, as an adult looking back, I realized that orb was anything but magic. It was someone's flashlight. It never happened again, but I'm still afraid of having window blinds open at night. I was driving one night in a really foul mood and speeding. Like when I say speeding I mean at least 25 over the limit. Anyway, this car gets behind me, and for some reason I can just tell it wasn't a cop. It was a full tinted Chevy truck with weird lights on it, like comically large aftermarket front headlights. Once it got behind me, I got a really eerie feeling I can't explain. Like my body just knew something was wrong. Anyway, I figured, if it was a cop they would light me up for speeding, but for some reason they just kept pace with me, also speeding themselves. So at this point I'm getting a little weirded out, so I turn off the freeway and they follow me. I turn into a gas station and get out. I figure if I'm going to get axe murdered at least the cameras will pick it up and give my family some closure. Something just didn't sit right with me. I knew something was up. As I'm getting out of my car the truck rolls its windows down. And what I saw still haunts me to this day. It was a heavily disfigured guy, the only likes of which I can compare to that guy Rocky Dennis from the movie about the guy with a crazy disfigured head who falls for that girl who loves him for him and not the abomination. That is his face. And he starts to motion me with his finger, like telling me to come closer. I don't care. If he was going to give me the winning Powerball numbers there was no way in hell I was going to approach his car. I bolt inside the gas station. At this point my whole body is shaking. I try and tell the clerk what's going on as they stare at me, probably thinking I'm drunk or high off my ass as my story doesn't make any sense. I go to look outside and the truck is gone. I still have nightmares to this day. When I was in my 20s in the early 1990s I had a car accident that kept me in hospital for about a year. It was a Catholic hospital and most of the nursing staff were nuns, and besides the normal checks they regularly just stopped in to chat and see how I was doing. Early one morning there was a knock and this nun came in that I hadn't seen before and introduced herself as Sister Greta, a member of the nursing staff. She sat on the side of the bed and we spoke for a few minutes, then she asked if she could say a prayer for me. She held my hand and said a prayer, then wished me well and left. About 5 minutes later there was another knock and one of the regular sisters came in to say hi. I remarked it was going to be a good day because I'd already had one visit from Sister Greta and now I was getting another one. She said there wasn't a Sister Greta on the staff and there was only 2 sisters around, it being so early. I pointed to the bed which clearly showed where she had been sitting and described her and the habit she had been wearing, now getting a bit unnerved. The sister basically shrugged and bustled off. She came back about half an hour later with a book about the hospital's history and showed me a picture of some nuns from the 50s. Their habits were exactly the same as Sister Greta's that I described. Turns out that patients regularly mentioned talking to nuns in old garb that definitely weren't part of the current staff. I never saw her again or anything similar while I was there. Kinda freaky but not overly disturbing. I can't really explain it, but I guess it's the sort of ghost story I'm okay with, if that's what it was. Edit. Okay, heaps of cool questions that I'll reply to, but a couple of common ones. No, I'm not religious by any stretch. I believe in getting a good night's sleep, steak, and the love of a good woman, or man, or whatever lights your candle. I made some belief calls in my mid-teens, and have stuck to them. Nope, not once did anyone try and save or convert me. In fact, my father marked the religion question as N/A on the admission documents, and neither of us were ever questioned on it. If a prayer was ever said, I was asked first if that was okay, and, a few times, I did decline. Trust me, when you have been assisted to sheet while lying down on your back with your legs in traction and experience the cleanup operation afterwards, it takes some time to want company again. The first few weeks I was on meds, morphine and tramadol being the options on the menu. They bunged me up, see bedpan comments above, and the docs warned me about dependency, so, with the exception of post-surgical relief, it was Panadol, Disprin, and Oxapol, so. If I remember right, the sisters all lived on the top floor of the hospital, so technically yes, there was someone living in the attic. Could the nuns have been pranking me? Absolutely. Despite perceptions, they are a funny bunch, enjoy a good laugh, read comics and watch Star Wars. Only, there was never a "ha, we got you." Yup, it absolutely could have been a hallucination, ignoring the bum imprint on the bed, and yup, it absolutely could have been sleep paralysis, and yup, I absolutely could have actually dreamed it all. But Op asked what strange stuff had happened that I couldn't explain. No, I don't think she was Cthulhu or one of his followers, but I've been wrong about such things before. Edit. So a few more things. I'm originally from, and this happened, in Zimbabwe. The hospital is called Mater Dei, and no, I haven't found any record of a Sister Greta working there. The quick summary of what happened was that I was asleep in the back of a pickup on the way back from a rugby tournament. We had a head-on with a drunk driver and I went through the back of the cab, the windscreen, hit the other car, and ended up in the bush some meters away. Multiple internal injuries, lacerated liver, kidney damage and collapsed lung, broken bones, ribs, jaw, collarbone, hip, and 3 crushed vertebrae, T12, L1, L2. The spinal cord was intact, but compressed, hence the lack of feeling and movement from my mid-torso down. The surgeries were to wire sheet like my jaw up, decompress and remove bone fragments from my spinal column and fuse the affected vertebrae. I'm now 2 inches shorter than I was, and have a curve on my back that Quasimodo would be proud of. Despite this, I was the lucky one, and that's all I'm going to say about that. This being where it was, insurance and medical aid were really not much use. My dad paid most of the bills by emptying his savings and taking out a loan, and the rugby community pitched in as well. The hospital trust waived a bunch of the cost too. It was a prick of a thing money wise, but I have managed to pay back, or pay forward it all. I don't quite get the "nun plays a wild prank to raise money" thing, but okay. I was never asked for money other than the bills which they let us to pay over, literally, yes. I also don't quite get the "nun plays a wild prank to convert souls." Some morphine in my drip and a tart in a robe with a halo would have worked way better, and that's just off the top of my head. There was no attempt to save my soul, none. Last thing about this, being a nurse, or any other medical job, is a nasty, hard, selfless, and rewardless job from what I saw, and yet that is what they did. They cleaned up my sheet, they helped me vomit, they sat while I cried my heart out for my friends, and for my own future. They patiently put up with me when I got ranty and ravy. They found me blood when I needed it, because I have a stupid blood type, and they never ever told me to pray, look to God, count my blessings, thank the saints or anything like that. They asked their God to help, and then let me lean on them. Anyone calling bullshit, good on ya. I wouldn't believe it either, and that's cool. Opinion is a wonderful thing. Okay, way too many of you are worried by some inside knowledge I may have on Cthulhu. I don't. I just accidentally holidayed at Raleigh 1 year, and let's just say the brochures didn't match the experience. I had a strange experience with something similar to what you describe. This is in England about 2 decades ago. I was a young kid and me, my brother and my parents were all stood in the bathroom. My dad had brushed my brother's teeth for him and was about to brush mine. We were very young. My dad put the toothpaste on my toothbrush and then went to turn the tap on to give it a rinse before sticking it in my mouth. When he turned the tap on, then this creature pops out and lands on the toothbrush. It looked incredibly similar to what you describe. Humanoid-like and only like 3 to 5 inches tall. It seemed strangely aware and conscious like a human is. It looked around to figure where it was. It looked me dead in the eye. I was so fucking creeped out. I had never seen anything like it before. I remember it very clearly. It definitely appeared to be far more human than fish, but with a fish-like features such as gills and smooth body with a jellyfish-like texture. It did not appear to be a jellyfish as it had a human face, and very clearly 2 legs and 2 arms with a human-shaped torso and chest. The body was very human. I froze and so did it. It almost seemed like it was on a mission and heading somewhere specific, but had come out at the wrong place. It looked around and realized where it was, then hopped into the drain, and it was gone. I was just frozen in shock. My parents didn't realize, so my dad continued to push the toothbrush towards my mouth. I was scared as this unknown creature whose skin had a slight slimy look to it had been on something that was about to go in my mouth. I tried to stop my dad, but he wouldn't let me. He is a tough guy you cannot say no to, so I cried while he brushed my teeth. My brother had seen it very clearly also, and was just as freaked out as I was. I brought it up many times over the years. My parents never believed me, but my brother did, and we could clearly recall it many times, both being freaked out. Over the years my brother seemed to forget or stop believing it, and by the time we were about 16 he says it didn't happen. I don't know what the fuck it was, but I'm clear in my mind that this happened, and it is similar to your description of the fish person. I was around the age of 10 and my younger sister was 7. Usually, whenever my sister was scared during the night she would wake me up, and so I would comfort her and tuck her in bed. However, this night was different, and she was shaking me furiously and crying, couldn't speak, etc. So I rushed to her room, and after a few minutes she could finally tell me that she could hear faint footsteps up and down the small hallway outside our rooms. Our rooms are opposite from each other in the hallway. So we tried to be quiet and listen for the footsteps and couldn't hear anything, and I thought she must be hearing things, etc. Then after we calmed down we started hearing the footsteps, and they were actually so clear it sounded like there was someone right outside the room. We both feared that someone broke into the house and was wandering around our house. So, funnily enough, I grabbed a pillow to protect myself and my sister in case the "intruder" came inside. At this stage myself and my sister are both crying and nothing is happening. After 2 minutes of hearing footsteps I gained the courage to scream help. And I run down to my parents' room on the other end of the house. Wake them up and let them know what happens. Dad checks the entire house plus backyard. Nothing. He then goes to sleep. Relieved, I decide to lay in my sister's bed with her, so she is less shaken up from the situation. Around 15 minutes later, wide awake, a very loud screech happened in the kitchen for around 2 seconds, like something dragging on our floor tiles. Immediately, we both jump up and scream and cry. It was so loud my parents even woke up to see what it was. We left our room before my parents and saw our wooden kitchen chair somehow dragged on the tiles around 5 meters away from the kitchen table. We were all shocked and could not explain what happened. We thought it might have something to do with the footsteps. This is hands down the scariest thing I have ever gone through. Update. Wow. What a wonderful response to wake up to. Thanks everyone for the likes, comments, and awards. I see there are a few questions and theories that people do have, and I'd like to further elaborate on what happened after the event. I live in Australia. In the area I live in there isn't a lot of wildlife other than birds, snakes, spiders, no raccoons, koalas, kangaroos or larger type animals etc. So I doubt any of those animals would have entered the house and caused the noise, moving chair and the footsteps. My mother was still frightened a couple days later and decided to contact her friend that was a spiritual medium, I think, and my mum was told that there were around 40 bad spirits in our home at the time. She decided to get our house blessed with holy water. I didn't know this additional information until recently because she was afraid it would affect my sister and I even more. I wasn't a big believer in spirits or any sort of paranormal activity, but after our house was blessed and spirits were gone, nothing else has happened up until now. Parents are definitely not pranksters in the slightest. Highly doubt they would have tried to pull such a horrible prank on their children. I see many comments saying that there might have been someone who actually broke in and tried to loot or had some weird fantasy. There's a theory that quote intruder tried to escape and hit the chair on the way out. However, my dad did search the house to make sure no one was inside or outside. Also no sign of a break-in. Everything was apparently still locked and closed. It is still so freaky that someone may have been in my house. It definitely sends chills down my spine thinking about that possibility. To be honest, I'm leaning towards it being some sort of paranormal activity. My house was closed/locked everywhere, and we would have heard the intruder run or escape and close the back door or doors, because my doors are quite loud when trying to open or close them. Edit. Sleep paralysis could probably be the closest explanation, but I should mention I was extremely aware and awake when I went to bed. I also know I hadn't fallen asleep as I was about 2 minutes into a Coldplay song and had it paused right at that moment when it started, as well as that I was moving around my bed and stood up at one point. Can also confirm it wasn't wind. Wasn't at all a windy night. I wished it was. We did pretty much put it down to a kangaroo or something at the time because there was plenty of nature around the house, but I would have heard whatever it was leave the bathroom. Also, I guess I can't really get it across strong enough via text, but it was something doing it very purposefully, especially opening the bathroom door. Not so much something I saw, in hindsight, thank fuck, but rather something I heard that I can't explain. I was staying at my dad's place for the weekend when I was about 16, and he lived out of town in rural Australia, the kind of place you don't lock doors etc. The house was pretty long, with my dad's room being right at the front of the house in a loft style second floor, and my room was literally down the other end of the house. I would say about 20 meters away down the end of a hallway with a few other rooms and bathroom on the way. It was just he and I there that weekend and I stayed up late on the computer and went to bed about 2 AM, got into bed and started listening to music to go to sleep to. About 2 minutes in, I hear the door at the end of the hall slam shut, and I had not closed it. I immediately take my earphones out and went to call out thinking it was my dad when a bedroom door right next to it opened. No one occupied that room at this time, and I immediately got that shaky shiver feeling all through my body, knowing something wasn't right and assuming someone had broken in. After about 30 seconds or so of silence, I hear a loud thud on the wooden hallway floor, like a stomp. After about 5 seconds, it happens again, and again. It was in a rhythm. About halfway down the hall to my bedroom, there was a little bit off the side, where the bathroom was, which had an old wooden sliding door, that was extremely loud to open and close. After about 30 seconds of the stomping and the hall stopping, at this point I was nearly throwing up from fear. The bathroom door was reefed open with all the strength you could imagine, like how you would imagine someone to do it in a complete and utter rage. I sat there completely paralyzed, thinking back quote my room is the next stop. I sat, waited, and nothing. I literally sat up in my bed until the sun came up, at which point I ran up to my dad's room to explain what had happened. We go through the house and nothing out of place, all the doors shut, which he had actually locked all but one. My dad said he did not come down, and he has never been known to sleepwalk or anything in his life. I have never been able to come up with a rational explanation of what happened that night. I'm not someone that is much of a believer in ghosts or anything, but that night I just had a feeling that whatever was out there wasn't exactly human. I still don't know who/what that could have been, and why I didn't hear anything after the bathroom door being ripped open. Still get chills telling people that story and even writing it out now. I feel so uneasy. Former Egyptian Air Force Mirage 2000 pilot here. I was one of the unlucky few that got selected to serve their mandatory years as pilots. It was considered unlucky because you stayed in the army a lot longer than soldiers and officers because of the amount of training that comes with flying a fighter jet. Anyway, fast forward 2 years, I'm a fully trained Mirage pilot, though I don't know much about dogfighting and fighter jet weapons as I didn't take it on full time. Like I said, this was mandatory service that everyone had to do. It's just I was selected to be a pilot for some reason. I only flew like 6 times in the 3.5 years I served. Anyways, picture this. It's a pitch black night and I go out for patrol on the Red Sea border between Egypt and Saudi Arabia. My friend is commanded to patrol the border on Sinai and Israel. That's usually the most actively patrolled border. Anyway, here I'm flying in Egyptian airspace when an extremely bright light shone through the cockpit, almost blinding me for a moment. It was so bright it got right through the tinting on the windows and my helmet. It was almost like that memory wiper in MIB. It lasted at least a minute. So just as I'm about to call this in to get a possible explanation, the air tower guy starts frantically sort of shouting, but not loudly, like he's talking really fast and in a very worried tone, and I can't hear him through the radio that well, so I couldn't tell what he was saying. I tuned into the frequency the other pilots were on, and they were all just as shaken as me. 30 minutes later, a calmer voice instructs us to all land immediately as there is an emergency being investigated by the more experienced pilots, dogfighters. So we land 2 at a time. I steer my plane into the hangar and I get out. Everyone has this frightened look on their face, eyes wide open, mouth shut and sort of lost. Like you talk to them and they're like, sorry, what were you saying again? So I go straight to the base commander hoping for an explanation. That puts my mind to ease. When I get there, I find that he's in his office on the phone shouting about unidentifiable aircrafts infiltrating Egyptian airspace, and that's when I really got scared. I have finished my mandatory service years ago now, and I'm currently studying law in Washington, but that night I constantly think about. My dad passed away in 1992. Among other things, I inherited a 1980 Chevy Love pickup. It may have been through ignorance, but I had looked high and low for 4 bolts that needed replaced on the U-joint. They were special and shouldered. I stopped everywhere looking for these bolts. Chevy nor Isuzu had them. I was at my wit's end as I had been looking for 2 months. One day a buddy of mine and me stopped at a hamburger joint that had a parts store next to it. We got out, and I said I'm gonna check this parts store, and I had one the bolts in my hand. As we were walking to the store, a guy that I can only describe that looked like the Jesus your grandmother had a picture of on her wall walked by us and said howdy or some shit. But here is what freaked me out. He said, those look like they are U-joint bolts for a Chevy Love pickup. I bet you are having a heck of a time. Yes, he said, heck finding them. Come over here, I think I have some in my truck. He walked over to his truck, looked in a 5-gallon bucket, and handed me 4 perfect bolts exactly like I needed. My jaw dropped. I tried to pay him or buy him a hamburger, and he said no, just help someone else out if you get the chance. That was 28 years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Edit. Thanks for the awards and all, but thanks for the replies. I swear this is a true story and happened just like I said. I don't talk as much to the guy that was with me that day, but he always asks if I have ran into JC lately. I'm really not spiritual or have any belief in psychics, ghosts, mind reading, fortune telling, any of that. But only a couple weeks ago there was an exchange that shook me a bit. I'd taken the train out to do a hiking trail and camp for a few days, finishing up in a town I'd only ever briefly visited once a couple years prior on bonfire night. As I made my way towards the station, I was stopped by a perfectly ordinary looking middle-aged woman. You don't believe in souls, she said. What? You don't believe in souls? But you also know you lost yours. What do you mean? You have absolutely no aura. I started to walk away, and she just raised her voice to shout after me. You had a procedure, a medical procedure, on your brain and your soul left. Of course it sounded like madwoman bullshit to anyone that could hear, but 15 years ago, when I was 18, I had 16 sessions of ECT. Being a large number of sessions in a short space of time at a young age, it left many difficult and long-lasting negative effects on me that I still struggle with. But one of the most pervasive feelings is what I have only ever been able to describe as whatever it was that made me me. Like the essence of me, my spark, had disappeared. I never really knew how to put this feeling into any accurate words, so despite my lack of belief, I'd always described it as feeling like I'd had my soul removed. Not sure if it's really seeing, but I had two experiences a couple of years apart that still spook me a little. First one was at university. Me and my friend were up talking, about to go to a pool hall to watch the wrestling on TV. We didn't have the channels on our dorm TV, and it was on late at night, UK. We were sober, pretty happily chatting away to each other, having a nice time, but the moment we step outside, there's this horrible feeling of dread. It's like a crushing feeling of despair. Makes the air feel really cold. I mean, it was cold anyway, but in a different way, a bit suffocating. The conversation dries up immediately as we walk down the street, but it takes a minute of us walking in silence for me to say to my mate, "Air's a bit thick tonight, isn't it?" He looks at me, wide-eyed, and says, "You feel it too?" He was a spiritualist, not something I believe in, but to each their own, and he remarks how it feels like death, and how it's close. Not what you want to hear at 2 AM on a cold February morning in the middle of a city, but the moment passes. We get to the pool hall, go inside and forget it happened. Until a few days later. I'm walking back to the halls/dorms, and there's a police cordon by an abandoned building me and my friend walked past that night. I ask around when I get back and apparently a few homeless people froze to death in the building and have likely been dead for a few days. I don't know. Could just be paranoia or something, but still makes me think several years later. Second one is less tangible, but I remember it provoked worse feelings. Basically, I was holidaying in Central Europe with my friends. We weren't in a particularly bad area, it was a place by a large lake. Hostels and resorts and all sorts, so it was touristy. Anyway, we go walking outside of the main town, looking for somewhere nice to eat. We end up in this strange suburb, a bit lost. While we are walking, the feeling that I had that night at university gets stronger. I'm with different mates here, so I'm the only one that seems to notice, but the feeling gets worse and worse, to the point where I just wanted to break down and cry. It's tough to describe, but it was that same feeling of despair, like hope had been sucked out of you and nothing would ever be good again. It's 100 times worse than the night at university, but I stick with my mates, all of whom are rational and smart blokes. We stop and have a conversation about how we are not going to find a cafe or bar out here, so we may as well turn back. I don't really say anything, my lips are really dry, my stomach is in knots. You know that creepy feeling you get when you think you're being watched? It was that, only multiplied many times over. The others don't seem to notice anything. Anyway, that's really all it was. We turned around, walked back the way we came, and the feeling gradually subsided. Ended up having a nice night. It might just be some extreme paranoia on my part, but it still makes my hair stand on end when I think of it. I had a dream one night that a former cowwalker, friend one, who I rarely interact with, was pregnant. In the dream I was back at my old office and they were explaining to me that I was going to fill in for her. I was very alarmed and like, oh heck no, I left y'all last year and went to new place. She came up and was very pregnant and was like, oh come on, it's just while I'm on leave. I told my husband because it was weird and we joked about how awful it would be for me to have gotten out of that workplace just to have to go back. Maybe a week later I dreamed about a different friend 2 I rarely speak with being pregnant as well. The next week I run into friend 1 somewhere and joke about the funny dream I had where she was pregnant. She is like, OMG, tells me she is, and they haven't told anyone yet that she's waiting. I laugh it off and later tell my husband about it. He jokes and is like, didn't you dream friend 2 was pregnant? Lol, you should give her a call. It's even funnier because friend 2 is my age and like me has older children. We are way too old to be starting over. I laugh it off. The next day, as an afterthought, I'm bored and driving a long distance. I call friend 2 about the funny dream and my husband's joke that I should call her. Turns out she is also pregnant and they haven't told anyone because they're having ultrasounds and amnio first due to her age and all. Completely crazy. I was a sophomore in college. I walked into my math class like any other day and sat in my usual spot, about 4 seats in on the 3rd row. Even though we didn't have assigned seats, there was always a girl sitting 2 seats to the left of me, empty seat between us, and her male friend to her left. They seemed to just be good friends, always laughing, never any reason to give me concern. This day in particular, I sat down, got my spiral and pencil out, and just quietly sat there looking forward and thinking about what I was going to do after class. Suddenly, I got this eerie feeling. I looked up to my left, and my heart practically stopped. The girl was staring straight at me, blank face, and her eyes were shining like a bright, piercing electric blue, shining like lasers. Nothing at all natural. I can't explain accurately. I was basically paralyzed and couldn't move or say anything. I eventually blinked and looked forward, then looked back, and the girl's head was turned back to her friend as he was talking again. About 2 years later, I was with friends and we were driving to a restaurant. Traffic was building up, since it was rush hour, and we were stopped in the right lane. I'm in the back seat and I happen to look up, diagonally to the left, and through the windshield. I look into the car sitting in the lane next us. Its back bumper is parallel to our front bumper, so I can see the driver easily. He's turned almost completely around and looking back at me, staring intensely. Even from that distance, I could see his eyes were that piercing, bright, laser-like blue, and I froze again. Just like the last incident, I was eventually able to blink, look away, and then immediately look back. The man was turned forward, the light turned green, and we all started moving forward. It's been about 15 years and I haven't experienced anything like that again, but it faked with my mind for a while. In high school there was a smoky greasy spoon diner my friends and I used to go to at night to drink coffee. It was one of the only places in town where teenagers could hang out without being made to order full meals. We went there enough, almost every day, that we got to know the waitresses by name and make small talk with them. One night we go in, and there's a new waitress, so we start asking her about herself. She says her husband's a truck driver and they move around a lot. We say that makes sense, since he's a trucker, and she replies with, "No, we move around a lot, because the longer I live in a place, the more I know about people cause I'm psychic. Eventually we have to move." She leaves the table and we start laughing and talking shit about her, and how she's crazy, and how that's on point for this diner. Maybe 20 minutes later she comes back, sits down at our booth, grabs my friend's hands, and tells my friend her whole life story. Not vague stuff, but incredibly detailed pieces of her history, like, you were sexually abused by an adult family member when you were 3 in the bathroom during another family member's birthday party. Your family knows about it and believes you, but thinks you should just get over it. Every single thing that she was accurate, and she talked for maybe 5 minutes, without my friend responding or doing anything except turning pale. We saw the waitress maybe 1 or 2 more times, and then she didn't work there anymore. To this day I still tell people that I don't believe in psychics, but that I met one once. When I was young my little brother and I would explore the woods and abandoned areas of the English countryside. There was this one abandoned, overgrown farmhouse that we and a few other kids from the town broke into by kicking in the kitchen window, which was the closest window to the ground as the kitchen was half in the ground. When we got into the kitchen the table was set and laid and very old, dry and shriveled food was still on the plates. To us it seemed like the family that lived there just got up during dinner, left, and never came back. We explored the rest of the house and the furniture was all there, covered in dust, cobwebs, animal droppings. It was awesome. Our own little secret clubhouse. There was only one room we couldn't get into, the heavy wooden door was locked, and no search for a key was ever fruitful. I couldn't explain it at the time, but I had to get into that room to look around. Consider it the video game completionist side of me. Myself and a few others found a heavy tree branch outside that we used as a battering ram, and after many swings we finally got this door busted enough to open. Inside the room was no furniture except one cabinet, fastened to the wall. Inside the cabinet was a single china doll. And while it wasn't creepy looking, the whole situation gave me, my brother and our friends the chills. We hastily pulled the door as closed as it would go, and left the house for the night. That night a thunderstorm rolled through town, and the next time we got out to the farm house it was nothing but rubble and burned wood. It had been a few days since the storm, but we figured it had been struck by lightning and burned to the ground. Being curious boys, we sifted through the ashes because why not? That is until I uncovered that cabinet in near perfect condition with very little burn marks on it and the doll inside perfectly intact, just staring at the sky. It freaked me to my core, and I've never ran away from anything faster in my life. I never went back, and by the next year my dad had been posted elsewhere in the country and we moved. But I have never shook the feeling that the lightning didn't start the fire, nor did the family just leave. This happened when I was 16 to 17. I never met my paternal grandmother. She died 2 years before I was born, and my father never really talked about her because feelings aren't manly, and I never even had seen a picture of her because all of our photos were in a storage unit in a different city. I had a dream one night that I was suddenly walking around a nice little house and came into what looked like the living room. To my left was a set of 2 chairs with bright green roses printed on cream fabric. In one of them sat my grandmother. I don't know how I knew she was my grandmother, but I just kinda did. She didn't acknowledge me at all. Across from her was an old box television playing a program with a man singing for a live audience. When the man finished singing and audience started to clap, she clapped along with them. And then my dream ended. The next morning I went out to the living to see my dad, and I told him about having a weird dream about grandma. He kinda scoffed, but when I mentioned the chairs his eyes went wide. He immediately got up from his chair and fetched from a cabinet in our entertainment center a small tin box I had never seen before. He opened it up and started pulling out tons of old photos until he found a picture of my elderly grandfather in the very chair I described. He said my grandparents had had those chairs since their wedding and he got rid of them when I was an infant. I then told him the rest of the dream, and when I mentioned the clapping my dad said that's exactly what she used to do. She always clapped when she watched a good performer on the television. We were both baffled. My dad dismissed it by saying, well, that's very interesting, and then kinda shut himself in the den for the rest of the day. I still don't understand how it happened. I couldn't have known any of the information in my dream. I'm happy that I at least got to see her once. I swear this happened. It's a pretty long one, so stay with me. When I was in college, I shared a house with 7 more students in an apartment slash flat slash whatever you want to call it. I live in 3rd floor. I was socially awkward, so I didn't make friends with any of them. They'd leave the house at midnight to play football, and there's always this one animation student that stays in the house with me. One night, I was staying up because I didn't finish my assignment as fast as I thought. Everyone either slept at their friend's house or play midnight football, but that night the animation student tagged along. So I was all alone in the apartment. Let me tell you about the apartment. It fucking sucks. Almost all of the lights are broken. My door handle is totally gone, leaving a weird circle hole so that I can use my finger to actually lock slash open my door through the gear, or whatever you wanna call it. We reported it to the college department, but they never did anything. That night I did my work in the dark on my study table in the living room. As I'm doing my assignment, I heard a chair noise from the room behind my back. I saw everyone literally stepped out from the house 2 hours ago, so I knew I was 100% alone. I decided to close my laptop and go to my room and sleep. I stood up, and naturally my chair made a screech noise. The chair noise replied louder from the room behind me. I went to my room, used my mail to close the door and sleep. I woke up the next day with my door half open. I called my roommate and asked him whether he entered the room last night. He didn't. So there's that. I never really wanted to do work late at night again. At least that's what I told myself that day. 2 weeks later, I got an assignment that requires me to stay up. I also took an animation course, and that shit was tiring. I started around 10 PM something, and then my housemates went out to play football except for the animation student, which calms me a bit. Around 12, he went out because he received a call from someone while holding his motorcycle helmet. He's 100% not coming back. So I tried to do my job without overthinking about the room behind me. I can't roam around at night because the security dude would ask me if I try to sneak into girls' apartment. I have friends, but I don't want to knock their doors at 12 something. So I called my mom. I saw her online and we talked a bit about life and stuff. I calmed down a bit and continued my work. Around 2 AM, I heard it again. You know it's from the same floor because my floor was vibrating. I did what every stupid characters do in movies. I stood up and checked the room. I'm not sure why. I just felt like if there's no one in the room I'd convince myself there's nothing to be afraid of. I checked under the bed and sheet. Nothing. I closed the room and then continue my work. From my peripheral view, I can see that the door opened slightly more and more, but very slowly. Subtle, but you can tell. I was shaking and tbh, I kinda froze. And then I felt something touched my leg. It was a hanger. It hit my leg, and when I look down it's still moving and rattles on the floor. Something threw a plastic hanger from the room behind me. I decided it was too much for me, and I got out from the house and I took a walk downstairs. The guard asked what was I doing. I lied and said I was waiting for my laundry to dry. There's a mini dobby at the lowest floor. I didn't sleep at my apartment often since I decided to sleep at my house, which is around 40 meters to an hour distance, because of that sheet. Apparently my neighbor house experienced something weird too, so I guess it's not just me. It's not really scary, but I felt uncomfortable for not being able to explain what happened, and I don't like that. Now I'm doing much better. I have lots of friends and changed my course. It's a fun story to tell. When I was in my 20s I was spending the night at a friend's house. She worked night shift generally, so at the point I was getting super tired she was still wide awake. She decided to stay in the living room and watch some movies and I went to her bedroom and went to sleep. After I'd been asleep for a bit, I woke up to see her coming in the room. It was dark, but I recognized her by her long hippie skirt she loved to wear. I figured she was getting her contact solution or something, but she just sat down on the bed with me and stared out the window. I asked her what she was doing, but she didn't answer. Normally if I get woken up in the night I'm up for hours, but right after asking her I got so sleepy and went back to sleep. The next morning I had completely forgotten about it until she asked me what I had come in the living room for last night. Apparently she had fallen asleep watching her movie, but was woken up at some point by me coming into the living room and sitting on the couch beside the window. She asked me what I was doing, but I didn't answer. I just stared out the window silently until she fell back asleep. When I told her she was the one who had come into my bedroom we both got super creeped out. She told me the figure who came into the living room with her had on a long flowing skirt, just like the one I had seen. She had just assumed it was me, and I had borrowed one of her skirts, since I was the only other person in the house. She lived in not the greatest part of town, which is why I was staying with her in the first place. Her roommate was away, and she didn't want to be alone all night. She's also very religious, so she believes that we were in danger that night and they were angels sent to guard us. The nice young man in the blue suit. I worked in a nursing home a while back as a cook. It was a good job. The residents were cool and the nurses rocked. Being a nursing home, however, meant that death came to our residents pretty frequently. Occasionally, staff would see strange things in the halls out of the corner of their eyes. The newer staff would always try to investigate. The older staff always knew they would find nothing. Here is the strangest thing, though. A day before a patient died, if they were lucid, they would report having had a visitor, despite no one being in the visitor logs. The visitor was always a young man, generically handsome, clean cut, and would sit with the patient, and they would talk. The patients who spoke of this man always said that they felt better after the talk. But, inevitably, they would die within 24 hours. Even seemingly healthy residents would pass away within 24 hours. So, when a resident brought up the young man in the blue suit, the nurses would unofficially contact the family and strongly encourage them to visit the resident. Earlier in this post I mentioned the staff seeing things out of the corner of their eyes. A person walking into a resident's room, a little blur of movement at the end of a hall. Several staff, myself included, got more direct looks at this entity. It was usually in a restroom or a resident's room. Always in a reflection, but definitely there. He seemed to be checking on the residents, placing a hand on them, and then leaving the room and vanishing. He would show up for non-nursing staff in restrooms, or via reflective surfaces in staff-only areas. My theory is that he was a psychopomp, there to guide and comfort the dying towards the end of their lives. He genuinely seemed to ease the burdens hanging on the residents, and they seemed to pass away pretty easily. This is a long one. I've moved around a lot, and I've had many similar, but smaller experiences in many different houses. To the point where I can walk into a place and get a vibe that just doesn't check out. Kind of like a weird little back of the brain gut feeling that you just push off as brain games. But out of all of it, this was the worst. I lived in a house with a few roommates that all believed the place was haunted. There was a good bit of activity, but none of it was particularly scary. It was enough that you couldn't doubt that something was there, but didn't really feel threatening at first. Just kind of spooky. I had a basement room and would always hear clear footsteps above me when no one else was home. The front door would like to open and close, and it would sound like one of the boys were coming home for the night. I'd walk upstairs to say hello and no one was there. The house had a very long driveway with a horse gate at the end that we had to manually open and close to keep the dogs in. There were many nights that I would come home and the gate would be open. I'd pull my truck up past the gate and hop out to close it, only to see that it was already closed. I would just laugh a little and jokingly yell out a thank you. Things started getting a lot worse when one of my roommates had his high school age sister stay for a few days as the parents were out of town. We let her throw a little party with her friends, and next thing you know, they're playing around with a Ouija board and the damn thing kept saying my name as I was on my way to the kitchen. I've known this girl since she was 2 feet tall, pretty much my little sister, so I just thought she was playing some sort of joke. So I was like, haha, whatever, fuck off. But within the month and a half after that, I started hearing and seeing things that made me begin to believe that I was schizophrenic. Seriously questioning my sanity. I became antisocial and fell into a huge depression that affected my job, my relationship and my friendships. Until one night, I had my girlfriend at the time over for a movie. I got up to use the restroom for like 30 seconds, heard a commotion, and came back to her curled up on my bed crying her eyes out and trying to hold my barking dog, who was more pissed than I'd ever seen and was just all over the place. She demanded that we both immediately leave to her house and refused to step into the building ever again. It was a long time before I got an explanation from her. She would get incredibly upset every time I tried to talk about it, and it became one of those things that you just don't bring up. She eventually told me that she had heard a loud, nasty guttural sound. Thinking something was wrong with my dog, she sat up to check on him, and one of the candles that I kept on my TV stand flew at her. I moved into my own place a week later, as I had already been planning to, and the last time I left that property literally felt like leaving a war zone. It was as if all my sanity returned within weeks. My motivation and energy returned, and I haven't had a single experience like that ever since. But I no longer keep any candles anywhere in my house anymore. A year or so later, after hanging with my past roommates, trading stories and discussing all of our experiences with that house, I did a little research and found out that not only the house, but that entire area is known as a hotspot for these kind of things. Actually happened a few weeks ago. I was out with a group of friends just chilling around the city. Someone decided that we should head on over to the library and just loiter there for a little while. Once we got there, I noticed this one guy stand out and got the feeling he was eyeballing me. So I said I was going to the bathroom really quickly. So when I got to the bathroom, the guy was already there, even though I hadn't seen him move from the spot he was sitting at. So I backed out of there as quickly as possible. When I got to my group again, I suggested that we should go eat somewhere, just so I could leave the library. When we started to head out, I saw the guy outside, still staring at me. Or maybe us, I don't know. And at that point I knew something was wrong. When we got to a place to eat, I pulled one of my friends aside and told him about the guy. He didn't seem that worried at first, but when I asked him if he could lead me home, he started to ask questions. For context, I'm not someone who tends to ask someone to help me home. I can take care of myself. There was just something really sketchy about the guy. So when we get done eating, me and the friend begin to head home. And on the metro I see the guy again. Still staring. I point him out to my friend and he gets worried. At this point I realize that I still haven't even thought about calling the police. So we get off on a very crowded platform and I call the police for the first time in my life. He's still there. We keep an eye on him just in case. And when the police showed up we took our eyes off him for a few seconds and point to where he was just moments ago. Surprise, surprise. He's gone. Not a trace. The police could tell I was shook and asked questions, like what he looked like and such. I gave them the best description I could. And so did my friend. The police told us they could give us a ride home if we wanted to, and I don't think I've ever given a faster yes in my life. I don't think I was hallucinating as my friend saw him as well. I still look over my shoulder whenever I go outside. I was standing on the deck of a sailboat, stone cold sober, head tilted up toward the heavens, watching both the sail I was trimming and shooting stars in an incredible night sky at about 3 AM. I was a member of the crew on a vessel that was part of a 300 boat race from Chicago to Mackinac Island. The fastest boats in this 333-mile race finish in around 30 hours, the slowest around 60, so everyone sails through the night, and boats generally have to crews who work in shifts to keep fresh. By the middle of that first night, you are so far from Chicago and north of Milwaukee that the sky turns black with no light pollution of any kind. If the night is clear, as this one was, the sky becomes an absolutely awesome canvas of celestial beauty. The first time I witnessed this is the first time I became aware that the night sky is alive with activity, not like the static picture seen from most places dotted with lights associated with human beings. Most crew members are intensely focused on a particular job on the deck, with one exception. When you are headed downwind and flying a spinnaker, the background sail in front, one crew member is charged with trimming that beast also known as the chute, which requires staring nearly straight up at the top edge of the sail and making adjustments as needed. It can be a tough job due mostly to keeping your head at that angle and maintaining a laser focus. I liked it because you were also staring at that incredible celestial canvas, which was often filled with shooting stars. This night was no exception. Shooting stars every 10 minutes or so. I would scream wow at each one and the other crew members would have a laugh at my giddiness. It was fantastic. Then one particularly prominent shooting star streamed in from my right as if intentionally placed in my field of view, so I didn't even have to move my head to get a crystal clear view of it. All the others fizzled out pretty quickly, but not this one. This one came to a sudden stop to the right of the sail edge that had my attention until that moment. I stared in disbelief for a few moments and assumed my laser focused eyes had somehow played a trick on me. But there was this star, much brighter than those around it, just sitting there after streaking in. As I stared for a few more moments, trying to make sense of this, an equally bright red star suddenly appeared right next to it, like they were almost attached. I flexed my knees a little more deeply in disbelief, staring, unable to speak. And after a few more moments, the tandem moved together, forming a very big Z pattern in the sky, very quickly, in about a second or two, and then disappeared. I stood for about a minute in stunned silence, deep breathing to regain my composure, and hearing a very strange kind of communication in my head that said, "Relax, it's okay, you're okay, and there is no need to make a big deal about this. You're fine, just keep doing your job." It's hard to explain where this voice came from. It wasn't mine trying to calm myself down. It felt as if it came from the stars, as weird as that sounds. But it worked, and I was super calm after hearing it. I didn't share the story with another crew member until we finished the race the next day, over a hamburger on Mackinac Island. I was on holidays in the Mediterranean 3 years ago on my motorbike. Somewhere in the middle of Corsica, I was kinda late for my next hotel, on a small road somewhere in the mountains. It was already dark, and this was a pitch black night. So there I were pretty alone. I hadn't seen any other vehicle for about 30 minutes or so, when suddenly I saw very bright car lights in my mirrors. It seemed like that car must have been way faster than me, since it was really close when I saw it. I thought, what the hell is this idiot tailgating me in this curvy road in the middle of the mountains? But then it started flashing its lights and turned its right indicator on. I thought it would like to overtake, so I braked a little and drove to the far right to let it pass at the next possibility. But then, it also braked and kept behind me, still flashing its lights. By then I got pretty nervous, so I braked even further until I came to a stop. Now only looking into the mirrors, the car had also stopped behind me. I couldn't recognize anything in my mirrors, so I stopped the music I was listening to and turned off the motor. At the moment I stepped off my motorbike and turned around, I got a real shock with instant goosebumps all over my body. There was nothing there. No lights, no car, no persons, no animals, just the small part of the road being in slight red of my bike's tail light. I looked in all directions and didn't see anything, so I took off my helmet to see if I can hear anything, but nothing. Only the sound of some distant insects and bushes in wind. I was shaking. It took me 15 minutes to calm down and get on my motorbike again. When I started rolling slowly again, just on the next sharp corner, around 150 meters from where I was standing, there was something on the road. I stopped again just before it, and was shocked again. Several big and small rocks, blood and a dead goat on the road just in the middle of the corner. If I hadn't stopped and drove so slowly, this corner could have been my last. You can imagine how happy I was once I arrived at the next town. P.S. I told this story 2 or 3 times to some friends, but nobody believed me, so it's the first time I tell it again. Yes, I did clean up the corner as good as I could when I was there. Took me another 15 minutes. Just a normal Saturday night. I was watching TV home alone with my 2 dogs when I heard a banging sound coming from the basement. Legit sounded like somebody was just banging something on the appliances we had down there. Now there is no access into the basement from down there, only through the upstairs rooms that I was in, and knew nobody could have come in and got past me. So with this knowledge I was not as scared as you may think, more curious as to what the heck the noise was. One of the 2 dogs, who is a meathead and wants to fight everybody, also heard the noise and was now bolting down into the basement to investigate. I get down and see that it is my other dog, banging his head into our dryer and chest freezer, which are next to each other. My meathead dog is just stood there watching confused. So I approach my other dog and calm him down, and we all go back upstairs. Now this freaked the heck out of me and upset me, as it seems such very strange behavior for my dog to do. Fast forward only 30 minutes or so, the banging starts again. I instantly look over to my dog, but he is laid down, but now also aware of the noise downstairs. We run down into the basement, and it is Meathead now banging his head in between the appliances. Again, I now calm Meathead down, and we all go back upstairs. Nothing has ever happened again since that night. 3 years now, so that ruled out brain tumors, which is what I read online about why maybe dogs bang their heads. But 2 dogs, suddenly on the same night. 3 years and the 3 of us never talk about that night, lol. Okay, this one is really weird, about a duplicate object. If anyone else has an experience like this, I would love to hear theories. I moved to Edmonton and brought all my books with me because I'm that person. I have an old vintage numerology book that I bought at a used bookstore in Kingston that had a weird mark in the top corner of the first page, like a scribble. It's from like 1940, so not in print and very loved by past owners. Okay, so when I moved alone. Packed my own stuff from my apartment where I lived alone and unpacked alone in the new one in Edmonton. I finish getting my books up in the shelf and take one with me to the bathroom, choosing the numerology one. Yes, I was poop reading, lol. Time passes and I leave the washroom and go to put it back on the shelf. But the book is already there, on the shelf, where the other one my hand had been. It's literally a copy of the exact same book. It has a mark in the corner. The dust jacket is in worse condition, but it's the same exact book. I still have them both. It's insane. I'll lend one copy to a friend and she destroyed the other dust jacket, but whatever, the entire thing shook me to the core. I told my friends about it, and they were freaked out, either thinking I was crazy, or how crazy this was. There is no way I'd have 2 copies of this book, and there is no way I would have packed and unpacked 2 copies, because it is so unique. It has a section that describes what type of person you are based on the day of the month you were born. If anyone wants to leave their birthday, i.e. born on the 5th, born on the 18th, etc., I can type it out for you. They're short. Literal duplicate time-folding numerology book. This is a longer story than I thought. I'm a skeptic, atheist, former science researcher, and this remains the most woo-woo thing I ever personally experienced and insisted on testing. In Seattle I met the colleague of a friend. She told me he was a Qigong practitioner. Qi equals the life force said to circulate through all living things. He was said to be able to manipulate this force. Of course I asked for a demo. Other friends were there too. Her colleague and I stood 6 to 8 feet apart, with eyes closed so I could not see him point. I stretched my hands out to both sides. He said, say whether I'm pointing at your left hand or your right hand. Soon I felt one hand get unmistakably hotter. It was a sensation like heat, like a warm glow. No air movement. I said right hand. It was at my direction, with my eyes still closed. He repeated the test several times, switching randomly between right and left hands. I could always tell which hand he was directing Qi without a single guess wrong. Next test, still standing 6 to 8 feet apart, but with me facing him this time, so I could see. He pointed his hand toward me, aimed at my neck. Nothing but open air between us in my friend's living room. I started to feel a sense of heat in, not on, my neck, a feeling of fullness, thickness, congestion that made me feel like swallowing, as if a knot of food or something was in my throat. The friends watching grew audibly concerned at this point, which I found interesting by itself, and prevailed on us to stop the test. I went for a walk around the lake later with the guy. He was slender, medium height, Asian or Asian American, late 20s/early 30s, smoked the occasional cigarette. I was astonished to learn later he was in his 50s. But this Qigong test remains the single most inexplicable thing I've experienced firsthand. 14 years ago, we were house and dog sitting for the summer for a friend who'd gone out of country and didn't want to leave their place empty or put their dog in a kennel for 2 months. One night there was a truly phenomenal thunderstorm. The lightning was so constant that instead of being dark everything was lit with the eerie flickering blue/white light with occasional purple flashes. The air was rumbling, the thunder was so active. The warm rain fell so thickly that you couldn't see the other side of the street, which was now a little river probably an inch or so deep. It was like being on an alien planet. We were mesmerized, and because it was so warm we went and sat outside on the covered front porch. Suddenly my BF said, "Is someone out there?" and nudged me to look down the street. It looked like the shadowy indistinct figure of a person weaving around in the middle of the street. As we watched the person came closer and closer down the street, but we quickly realized there was actually no one there. It was a roughly person-shaped hole in the rain. My BF was gripping my arm tightly by now, and we were frozen watching. You could see the falling rain stopping, as if hitting a body. There were sprays flying off in directions rain was not falling, and stompy splashes in the rain flowing down the street, just like you'd see if someone was stamping their foot in a puddle. But there was no one there. It was like watching the Invisible Man. It was now right in front of our house. There was a clear rhythm to the movements, and it became clear this figure seemed to be dancing in the rain. We were both terrified and fascinated, but there was this weird feeling of danger too. We were barely breathing and my BF whispered right in my ear, "It can't notice us." There was a super bright lightning flash just then, one so bright it left us blinking and seeing purple for a moment. The figure stopped dancing and was standing before the house, and we both got this horrible feeling it was looking at us. Then the movement started up again, slower now. It made its way up the short driveway and onto the lawn in front of the porch where it slowed to a stop. My BF's grip on my arm was painful at this point and I could feel him winding up to make a lunge for the door to try and get us inside. Suddenly the dog started barking aggressively and loudly in a way we'd never heard it bark before, and then it started throwing itself at the door. The thing on the lawn jumped backwards and then ran away across the grass, down the drive, and then down the street. As it was running away, we jumped up and ran into the house, locking the door behind us and calming the dog down, who was beside himself and insisted on smelling us all over for some time before his hackles would go down. To this day I have no idea what we could have seen. We've talked about it many times. Every rainstorm we spend a bit of time looking out of windows. We live about 15 minutes drive from there now. We've never seen anything similar since. My ex-husband and father of my children passed earlier this year. We were together for over a decade. About 2 or 3 weeks before he died I had a dream that his sister called me to tell me that he had passed. I remembered the dream after I woke up. I usually don't, but shook it off as being disturbed by this one, so that's why I retained it. When he passed from unexpected heart failure on Memorial Day, my ex's sister tried reaching me on Facebook as she lost my number. When she couldn't reach me, she called my daughter. Deja vu doesn't even begin to touch the feelings I had when I returned her phone call. Standing in the living room pacing back and forth on the phone just like in my dream. I feel sick thinking about it now. My ex was getting increasingly ill in the week or so leading up to his death. He thought it was a bad cold / pneumonia / COVID etc. Lethargic, shortness of breath, coughing. No one put 2 and 2 together that really his stint was no longer functioning and he was going into heart failure. It bothers me that I had that dream. What was the point? How could I have known? Even knowing, what could I have done? I haven't shared with anyone about this. Haven't seen the point in sharing with family or friends, or how hearing about it could provide them with any sense of relief or comfort. My mom had something similar happen to her as a girl. She told me that she had a dream that she heard a knock on the door, opened it and her father collapsed. The next day after school there was a pounding on the door. She opened it and her father collapsed at her feet. Turns out he had leukemia. Lived until she was 14. My mom doesn't believe in supernatural things, but can't explain this. I was about 12, and I was away at camp. A nice summer evening. Dusk was well on its way to dark, and I went to the toilet block to brush my teeth. When I came out there was a springer sniffing around the base of a tree. It was strange, because there wasn't a dog on the site. I thought maybe one of the leaders had arrived late, and brought the dog from home. It was maybe 10 meters away from me. I watched it for a bit waiting for another kid or adult to turn up, so I could show them the dog. No one came by and the dog just sort of sniffed its way across the open field away from the huts and tents. It didn't feel late, and I knew there were adults nearby, so I followed the dog. It went into the forest path. The trees were yew trees and all bent and gnarly. After following the dog for only a short time I started to realize I'd probably screwed up for wandering away. The grown-ups were always telling us not to wander off, and I thought I was too smart to just amble off into the woods at night. But here I was. The trees started to look like specters, and I was trying to decide between running back and just screaming until someone found me. Seems like an overreaction 30 years later, but at that moment I was freaking out that I was lost in the woods. Just then the dog goes woof. A low breathy noise that came from the chest. Just a single noise, and then the air went still again. The dog stood on the path ahead of me, maybe 10 feet in front. Its body stiff like when they spot a bird. My heart was booming in my ears. My fight or flight reaction failed as I just stood there unable to do anything. On the path ahead of the dog emerged a figure. Dressed in a robe like a priest vestment, it walked towards the dog. Behind the figure were more people dressed the same. Like 3 or 4 more. The dog whiffed again, and the man looked up. "Uneni, there you are," he said to the dog, and it wagged its tail. I genuinely think that these people were going to murder me. My arms were fuzzy with pins and needles and I could stop swallowing. I must have gulped loudly, because the man walked toward the dog with his arm out to stroke it, and then he stopped and looked up at me. It was dark, but I saw him pretty well. He was middle-aged. At the time I thought old, but I was young and everyone over 30 seemed old. Maybe 50. Graying hair, glasses. He was average build and maybe just over 6 foot tall. He said, "Nenny, you've brought a friend?" I faking legged it. I ran through the woods and back to camp. I thought that I was lost in the middle of the woods, but I was back at camp in no time. I started shouting when I was back in the field. "There's monks in the woods. Monks in the woods." The leaders came out, and loads of the other kids. I told them what was happening and they all gapped flashlights and took me back into the woods. Now that I'm an adult I think that making me go back was the wrong choice, but the leaders were only teens themselves. When we got back to the place where they'd been, they were gone. They sent out search parties but no one found anything. I had to sleep in the hut that night, and I still didn't sleep very well. The next day there were more searches and the police were consulted. The good thing was I was believed, and they took it seriously, but they never found any monks or a dog called Nenny. People did try and tell me I must have misheard the name for Jenny or Nanny or something, as Nenny isn't a name, but it was Nenny. I moved across the country now. A few years ago I rescued a Springer. Her name was some stupid baby name that people who don't care about their animals call their pets. It made me laugh when I was out with her once, and I called her back by shouting Nenny at her. She waged her tail and loved it. I had told my wife the monk story years before, and she found it funny when I told her I'd started calling the dog Nenny. My sister sent me a picture that she'd taken. The way sibling do it had the caption, "I can't believe how old you have let yourself get." It had been taken at a BBQ a few weekends before, pre-pandemic. I stared at the picture for so long. It was me, but I'd grown up to be the monk in the woods. I was driving south from northern Ontario one year. I'm talking up near Hearst on my way to Toronto when I was at university. If anybody is unfamiliar with the area, northern Ontario is a vast spread of Canadian Shield, rocky landscape, and dense brush. A bunch of relatively small mining towns spread out over like a 300-kilometer radius. It's kinda dreary, and Highway 11 is the most depressing stretch of highway I've ever been on. For anybody familiar with it, close to midnight, and I'm past Kirkland Lake Cutoff, and decide to stop at the next stop/diner/whatever to get a coffee and stretch the legs. I pull off right near Englehart, peel into the Tim Hortons, and go to the bathroom. After I come out I grab a coffee and a snack and sit down to eat it. About 10 minutes go by and this old lady sits down at my table. There is nobody else in the shop apart from the ladies behind the counter. At first she didn't say anything, just looked at me, and she could probably tell I was a little freaked out. Finally she just went, "Truss, it's so good to see you. How have you been? How is dad's name, and mom's name, and his sister's name? Finished up with school?" I started to shake. I was so nervous, and asked her how she knew who I was, and that I was there. I had never been there before, and was a little freaked out. She got up super quietly again, just smiling, told me they've been keeping an eye on me, and then she left, and that was the end of it. I don't know who she was, or how she knew me, but at midnight in a little bumfuck town in northern Ontario in the middle of the night was enough to freak me out for the next little while. I always like to act like I'm a skeptic. In my life I've had only one experience that truly left me pondering the supernatural. The Rake. I used to wake up with sleep paralysis from ages 12 to 17. It was somewhat regular. At age 16, I saw something for the first time. I woke up sharply feeling a presence, which was new. I was a very anxious kid, so I immediately peered around my limited vision. Standing as upright as could be in the corner of my room was a thin humanoid shape. I closed my eyes out of fear and must have lay there for hours before drifting off. Months later, I woke up again for the first time since then. I peered down past my feet and the outline of the top of a head stared back at me. Again, I closed my eyes fearing the end. This time only morning brought me release. Not a month after the second time seeing something, I was driving home from work. Now freshly 16, and driving my first car. I felt amazing. I got off the highway and hit a long, 55 miles per hour country road that took me the rest of the way to my town. I flicked on my brights and turned the music up a bit. The road was known to be dangerous between deer and its sheer state of disrepair. I was speeding. Suddenly I saw a figure on the side of the road. It was crouching over what appeared to be a bag. I took my foot off the gas and coasted down a bit in speed. As I drew nearer I saw it wasn't a bag, it was a dead deer. Going 45-ish miles per hour now, I gave the figure one good look as I flew by. Its face was ghastly thin with ghastly body proportions. 4 months later I was an 8 hours drive north of that town working at a summer camp. I had been up there for a few weeks and high school week finally rolled around. I got to camp instead of work for a week. I got in the zone, got placed in a competitive cabin, and got close to the other boys quickly. Thursday night was the camp out night. This camp was in Michigan on the edge of the Huron National Forest. We would hike on an access road miles deep into the forest and find a spot to sleep under the stars. I remember passing the 18-mile marker, which is only 5 miles from the camp. The access road started beyond the other side of the camp. This left us about 5 miles due northwest of camp. We played all sorts of games and soon it was dark. As the 8 of us sat around the campfire with our counselor, a boy straight across the fire from me jerked to attention looking at something beyond me. I swung around with 2 other people and saw the tail of something vanishing down the path we'd forged through the brush to find our camping spot. He seemed shaken, but didn't even mention it. Later, as we are winding down the fire, he suddenly yelps and points through me. As everyone does, I whip around at the edge of the brush. Not even 15 yards from me was the ghastly humanoid features I'd seen in my room, and leering back was that same ghoulish face I'd seen on the side of the road. It turned and did a disgusting crouched run back down the path, using its hands for only every 3rd or 4th stride. Everyone was completely shaken. I'm now almost 21, and I've never seen anything of the sort again. After that final encounter, I didn't experience sleep paralysis again. As the tale of the rake goes, it appears in your sleep first, and every time you see it, it gathers closer to you until it's almost touching. Then you start to see it in real life until it's ready to take you. This happened a few months back. My girlfriend and I were up in New Hampshire, gold panning with her sister and brother-in-law. We got back to the condo and went outside to try to see the comet nearwise. We had no luck the first night. My GF's family left the next day, so it was just the 2 of us there. We were outside trying to see the comet at around 9:30. It was great. We saw Saturn and Jupiter ride together over the mountains. We saw satellites flying by, and we even saw a couple shooting stars, but no nearwise. We decided a while later, around 11 o'clock, that we were gonna go look for the comet again. We had been looking at the sky for a long time when we finally saw what we thought was the comet, straight below the Big Dipper. So we went back to the condo, because I had remembered that we had a pair of binoculars. I grabbed them, and we went back to the stargazing spot. Now the binoculars only had one lens, so the image wasn't very clear, but it still magnified it enough to where we could tell that we were definitely seeing nearwise. It was incredible. This is where it gets weird. After looking at the comet, we were looking at the rest of the sky when we saw what looked like a blinking light in the sky, and it was moving all over the place. It definitely wasn't a satellite, because satellites move in straight lines. This thing was going in every direction, making turns, and doing like corkscrews all over the night sky. When I looked through the binoculars, I could see that the object wasn't actually blinking, but that the light appeared to be on one side of it, and it was constantly rotating, so the source of light would either face toward or away from us. When the light was pointing directly towards us, it was the brightest thing in the sky. Even when it turned away from us, I could still see it through the binoculars as this small dark spot. We watched this thing fly around in the sky for as long as we could, until we couldn't see it anymore. What we saw was a UFO. I don't know what the hell it was, but that night has stuck with me. TLDR, went to see the comet nearwise with my girlfriend. Ended up seeing a UFO too. Well, I'll add here. Pretty much not sure what I believe in at this point tbh, so I'm not in a mind space to rule anything out, but in my brain I don't believe anything superstitious or supernatural, but IDK what to make of this kinda stuff, so I'll just post it here and forget it. I have a friend from college, and according to him, he's had something attached to him since early childhood. Typical scary dark figure made of blackness type of thing that'll interfere with his life every once in a while. Most commonly he won't see it, but something will smash his blinds to the side suddenly while he's in a room, or there'll be 3 to 5 loud knocks on one of his walls/doors. What made me believe him before I saw anything is that he did 6 years in the Navy and has had friends before, during and after his time in that have seen it 2 times, and 2 different people, or heard or seen its interaction a handful of times/people. My friend has had a lot of weird shit happen to him over the years, not necessarily related to whatever he's got going on with whatever this is. Anyways, one of the times he was telling me about this, and we'd actually called up a friend of his who'd seen it, I was pretty damn skeptical, newly a non-believer in religion, and brash. I spoke out loud and told it to attach itself to me. BC I thought the idea was ridiculous and my friend was all for it. I think BC no one had done that before and he could definitely tell I thought it was BS. Since then weird things happen every once in a while. In the week directly after that there was a case where lights kept being on when I got home. One in particular was a touch activated lamp that was stuffed in a work in progress clutter that was slightly sectioned off by an improv wall. That stood out BC. When I eventually went to unplug the thing after a few times of that happening, it wasn't plugged in. I had something hit the front door hard when I was sitting 5 feet from it at my desk, think a full-on kick to the door, but when I opened it the glass and metal screen door in front of the hit door was still closed, intact, and locked. The same day the door handle to the front door sounded like it was being interfered with / tapped, but again, the glass screen door was still shut and locked and protecting the main door from the outside. Once in the front door bedroom bathroom work desk hallway I'd had pretty bad dread set in. If you haven't experienced it before, you can't approximate it by having feared about something before. Dread is really a particular thing. I went about turning all the lights on in the place and closing the blinds, checking the closet, etc. And when I was in the hallway I started hearing heavy ragged breathing over my shoulder. Nothing was there obviously, and I ended up leaving that night and spending it at my friend's house. At this point it's also noteworthy to point out that very often now when something happens to him, most of the time something will have happened to me, and one of us tells the other pretty much immediately. A weird one was around March 2020. My friend was moving places and stayed at my place for a night. We slept in the same bed. Before the gay jokes, we are brothers and both gay and not attracted to each other, so there's no danger there. Anyways, I woke up in the middle of the night, which is uncommon enough, and I remember the room was weirdly dark and I could see eyes looking into the room from outside the window at the head of the bed, and the walls of the room had weird patterns all over them. I woke him up, and by the time I did, things were more or less normal, but I didn't go back to sleep for a couple hours and wrote what happened while I was still awake, maybe 10 minutes after it happened. I've had more things happen since I told whatever it is to attach itself to me, and TBH I've got no idea. I don't do drugs, and nothing has ever happened to me when I've been drinking. I'm a skeptical, generally non-believing facts vs feelings type of guy, and I don't like that whatever's happened has happened. IDK, and I probably won't ever know. Oh well, now I look like a nut. Posted about this in a previous thread. Not the creepiest story, but it was very unsettling at the time. When this happened, about 2.5 years ago, I was sleeping in a room at the back of my house that faces the back of another row of houses. For some reason the people in those houses often don't close their curtains at night, which can get awkward, because I often felt like I was accidentally spying on people if they had their lights on. One evening I was doing something in my room, tidying up or something, and I glanced out the window. 2 houses down, in one of the upstairs bedrooms, there was a naked teenage girl standing right in front of the window, staring out. The bedroom light was on even though there was still plenty of daylight, so this was hard to miss. I'm a guy in my early 30s. Assuming she was just getting dressed and forgot to close the curtains, and not wanting this girl to think I was being creepy, I quickly looked away and went about whatever I was doing. A few minutes later I happened to look out the window again, and she was still there, still just staring straight out her bedroom window. This was weird enough that I stopped what I was doing and tried to figure out what the fuck was going on. The girl started moving really slowly, sort of making these odd poses, like turning slightly from side to side, or lifting one arm, like she was looking at herself in a mirror. Except obviously there was no mirror, and it wasn't nearly dark enough to get a reflection in the window, like you do sometimes at night. The sun had just begun to set, so it was actually still quite bright out. I just stood there for a while, trying to come up with some sort of explanation for what I was seeing. But the whole thing started to feel way too creepy on every level, at which point I noped out and closed my blinds. About 15 minutes later I cautiously checked to see if the coast was clear and the girl was gone. And this is where it gets really weird. It took me a while to realize this, but there is no teenage girl living in that house. The couple who live there are elderly, and if it was a grandchild or something then I've never seen her there before or since. I also find it really odd that no one else saw her. I know they didn't, because gossip gets around this street like wildfire, and this is the sort of thing that would have been talked about. Like I said, not the most thrilling story, but it was incredibly eerie, and I still wonder who the hell that was, and what she was doing. When I was about 7 or 8, I woke up to the sound of our dog barking furiously. Just outside one of my windows was the well house and her doghouse was attached to one side. I remember her barking viciously, which usually meant there were coyotes or raccoons in the yard. I sat up, about to check for coyotes. My dad was a heavy sleeper. I often had to wake him up to shoot coyotes before he let me have his air rifle when I heard our dog yelp. Our dog was a scrappy black lab who would spend half the night chasing and fighting creatures of the night. She never backed down from a fight, which is why we often kept her on a long chain at night. She would sound the alarm and we would chase off the coyotes from the yard, kept her from getting seriously hurt. I say this because I had never heard her yelp. Seconds after she yelps, I hear and see something big running between my window and the well house. I could hear ragged breathing and galloping, and as it passed by my window I saw the outline of its hunched back filling half of my window pane. Our house sat on a 2-foot stone foundation, and my windows were about 6 feet off the ground. This thing had to be at least 8 feet tall, possibly taller since it sounded like it was galloping on 4 legs. I heard it pause for just a second to jump the fence about 20 feet from my room, before it continued on, and it faded into the night. I'll never forget sitting frozen in bed, listening to its ragged breathing and footfalls rapidly fading away. Dog didn't bark the rest of the night. She was probably hiding in her doghouse, and it took me a while before I could lay down and fall back asleep. There was a window right next to the head of my bed, and I was terrified that I would lay down and see the face of the beast staring at me. Never mentioned it to my family, figured they wouldn't believe me anyways. This is really long. I've never written about what happened to me, so it's a bit rambling at times. This happened several years ago in college, and I still can't fully explain it. Before you ask, I was not using drugs. I was sleeping normally. I've never had a severe head injury, and I was not under an unusual amount of stress. I was sitting in one of my classes taking notes while the professor lectured when I suddenly realized that my entire existence/identity had completely changed. I don't remember anything about my former existence, but I'm absolutely certain that my reality transformed in that moment. I had the eerie feeling that I was magically in a different body, with a different personal history, a different family and friends, sitting in a different class with different people around me, maybe in a different place. The wildest part about it is that I looked down at my notes, and they had nothing to do with the class I was sitting in. Like my hand was still mid-writing a sentence, but the stuff I had written before transition was about business/marketing concepts that I never learned about in any class in college, and the professor was clearly currently lecturing about public health. It was my handwriting though. I started looking around really perturbed, and I probably gasped because the professor stopped and asked if I was okay. I got up and left the class and immediately walked to the psychological counseling center because I thought I had a schizophrenic episode or something and I might need professional help. It was 2 people, probably in case they needed to sign me in for involuntary hospitalization, tried me and considered admitting me for inpatient treatment because I was pretty frantic and talking about how I didn't truly exist and I wasn't real. After calming down and talking a lot, they said I had probably experienced a severe dissociative episode, but no one could explain the notes. I showed them, and they all agreed that it was weird, but said I probably just forgot about notes from a different class and spaced out. Again, I never took a business class, and had to look up terms and formulas from the notes to even know what they meant. I wasn't convinced, so they brought out the actual DSM book to show me that my symptoms aligned with dissociation. I had to lie to them and tell them I believed it was a dissociative episode and spend a long time talking and convincing them I was okay to avoid going to the hospital. Maybe I did dissociate, but that doesn't explain my apparent lasting personality change from that time on. I was supposedly a very bubbly, outgoing person before, and I'm decidedly a reserved and shy person now. Writing this out is literally stressing me out so much right now because it's so vulnerable. I have completely different interests and goals now than I did before the episode. I will admit that I've had some depression and anxiety throughout my life, but never anything that altered my perception of reality. The experience still really baffles me, and I try not to think about it too much, because I start wondering about my existence in alternate timelines etc., and it's a spiral that makes me feel a little sad, and makes me feel like my lifelong relationships aren't genuine. I haven't really been able to maintain these relationships anyway. My family has almost completely disowned me because they say that I changed and lost my values when I moved away from home for college. I can't relate to them at all. We struggle to communicate, and I don't love anyone in my family. I do love many other people, so I'm not just some psychopath. I haven't felt anything when people in my family have died, but I've been devastated by the deaths/misfortunes of other loved ones, mostly people I met after the episode. This isn't your classic case of conservative parents disowning their newly progressive child. My parents say that I used to care about important things like getting married and having kids, but I can't remember ever having a desire to get married, and I've always been terrified of the thought of having children. I don't enjoy or care about supposed family traditions, and I have entirely different taste in food, entertainment, style, everything. I'm also weirdly the only person in my family who doesn't speak with a deep southern accent, and I remember people commenting on it after the episode. I've seen freaky videos of myself as a kid where my accent is clearly different. I even speak in a much higher pitch, but I think I made a conscious decision to drop the accent so people wouldn't think I was dumb. I'm not sure though. It's like a hazy memory. A lot of my memories feel this way. Nothing from before the episode is clear like the memories I've made after the episode. No one in college commented that my accent had changed, so maybe it was just more striking to my hometown friends because they hadn't heard from me in a while. It's confusing, but I feel like I can't be the same person my parents raised. Many of my friends who I allegedly grew up with have also said that I seem really different since I went away to college. I definitely matured a lot and developed as a person, but their comments have made me think that I'm really not the same person. I can't seem to relate to them on anything, and I don't understand how we ever hung out. Especially when it comes to humor, we don't laugh at any of the same stuff. I feel like I have to pretend to be someone else to spend time with them, so our friendships have fizzled out. They often want to gossip about people from our childhoods, but I feel no connection to those people and I don't care about gossiping because they are basically strangers to me. Even in college, I was a leader and founder in a sorority before the episode, but afterwards I couldn't understand why I would ever pay to be part of an organization with such strict and old school rules. I hated the events I helped organize and attended, and the rituals were meaningless to me. I went from wearing my t-shirts and bags emblazoned with my sorority's Greek letters every day, to not wanting to touch those items because they felt like someone else's possessions. I left the sisterhood, which was apparently surprising to everyone except me. One troubling thing is that I don't really care about the relationships I've lost because of my personality change. I don't feel like I even really know those people, so it doesn't matter to me if they don't like me or are surprised by my behavior. I've pretty much had to restart and make entirely different friends since this happened, but I've also reconnected with people from my past who say I'm nothing like they remember, and we've gotten along really well. I can't explain why I wasn't closer to these people all along, because we have shared interests, values, communication styles etc. My memories of things I like doing before are not things I would enjoy now, and I don't understand how I ever did. For example, I apparently skipped prom to go fishing because I didn't want to pay the entrance fee, but I love dressing up and dancing and I don't like fishing. This makes absolutely no sense to me. I have tattoos whose significance I don't totally understand. They look pretty, but I can't explain why I got them, and I don't remember where the idea for them came from. When I see pictures of myself from before, I look like a stranger to me. I dress differently, stand differently, smile differently. It's perturbing to me, but other people don't seem to notice. There's something really off about my eyes in photos from before, and it makes me feel uneasy. It's like the way I held the muscles in my face while smiling was different before. I can make my face look like that now, but it's not how I naturally smile. I still sometimes have a hard time with pictures because I don't feel like I'm the person in the photo. I really hate mirrors and always worry that my reflection is going to take back control or something. I'm afraid to look at my reflection in the eyes. One major worry I have is that one day I'll just switch back and have to go through all of this again. Maybe it will happen multiple times. Maybe I'll become an entirely different person again. I really fucking hope not. It's all incredibly strange, and I can't explain it and it freaks me out. It seems to make psychologists/psychiatrists uncomfortable, so I've largely just dropped it at this point, but I obviously still think about it all the time. Boy golly, if you have any theories, I'd love to hear them. If you're still reading, thanks for sticking with me, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about my weird experience. My girlfriend and I were going to MX for a girls trip and we were both packing. I had laid out the clothes I was taking and folded them on the end of my bed, and I wanted to take along a matching set of earrings and a necklace. I looked up and down for the necklace everywhere. I even called my girlfriend to look for it at her place. Since she lived down the block from me, we spent a lot of time together. So then she comes over and helps me look at my house. Neither of us can find this necklace, but we have errands to run before our flight was leaving the next day, so we hop in her car and do them together. We come back to my house and proceed to go upstairs to my bedroom and drop off the things I had gotten for the trip, when I notice there is the necklace on top of my neatly folded clothes. My friend and I had full body goosebumps, and both of us looked at each other and knew exactly what had happened. Somehow, that necklace got teleported. It sounds crazy, but there it was, and the only explanation I or either of us have is that someone or something put that necklace there. My mother and father had recently passed about 2 years prior. We both think it was either my mom or another type of energy that brought that necklace back from wherever it was and put it in plain sight on my folded clothes for my trip. The rest of the few pieces of jewelry I was planning on bringing on that trip were already packed in a small jewelry bag. To this day I cannot explain how or who brought that necklace back while my friend and I ran out for a few things for our trip the next day. Since that happened, I have been able to find all kinds of lost objects by just asking the universe, or sometimes Street Anthony, finder of lost objects, if you're Catholic, and almost 100% of the time the object is found within hours. Many times it will just appear somewhere, or I'll stumble upon it. But nothing has ever happened like the necklace. That was by far the most eerie and unexplained thing I have ever encountered. That my girlfriend was my actual witness made it even more eerie. Had it only been me, I'd never feel able to tell the story and know without a doubt it was some sort of spirit intervention. Didn't happen to me, but instead a very close friend, worth sharing as it's mad, and I was present for the video. You'll understand shortly, and the drive later. So, country lane, driving along at around 50-60 miles per hour, which is standard for a country lane, or 90 if you are Ed Sheeran. If you don't know about UK country roads, they are no wider than a single car in some cases, ditches either side, and usually have posts to stop you veering off track. Also, most country roads don't have lights either. Picture the scene: driving at speed, goes round a corner, to be presented with a tractor coming the opposite direction, covering the entire road. UK tractors are huge. My friend said there was very little time to realize, but both tractor driver and my friend looked, swerved, and carried on. My friend, shaken, stopped at the next junction, thinking how the hell did I not get hit, not veer off into a post, and what about the ditch, why am I not in a ditch? Comes back to the office, dashcam in hand, visibly shaken, white as a ghost, and eager to plug the dashcam into their PC to see how they managed to still be alive. Plus we all wanted to see. Here is the bit of which none of us can explain. The dashcam shows footage up to the corner. You see the tractor, then nothing. Completely blank screen, no sound, no picture. Around 5 seconds of blank screen, no sound, and then video and sound again showing the clear road ahead, followed by them stopping at the junction. Audio picks up my friend swearing, like how the fecked and fecking hell. You can imagine the chaos. We all sit there, going back and forth thinking there has been an error or perhaps we picked the wrong file. Anything to explain what we were and were not seeing. My friend decides to go back down the lane with me in the passenger seat to see if perhaps she went onto a bank of earth or perhaps a passing point. I had a copy of the video dash cam on my phone, just so we know the exact spot she supposedly passed the tractor. We get there and no bullshit. There is nowhere that either the tractor nor my friend could have gone. They should have either crashed into each other or my friend should be upside down in a ditch in her car. So we figured, let's try and trace the tractor to a farm, just going by what little dash cam footage we had. We checked around 4 farms, found 1 or 2, and yes, we also found the tractor. Spoke to the farmer, and I shit you not, he said, the tractor hadn't been out that day as the driver for that vehicle was off with sickness. We just can't explain it. I mentioned this on a post a year or so ago, but I think it applies here. I've talked to friends and family about it, but thus far there isn't an explanation that satisfies anyone. I'm a choir lad whose choir is fortunate enough to be invited to the Royal Albert Hall a few times each year. Usually our dressing room is in the equivalent of the basement, not as fabulous as some of the big shots, but most of the time the boys invited are younger than 16, so they are always worried we'll break something. Very close to our dressing room is something called the Artist Bar. As the name suggests, it's a bar for the performers, and drinks and snacks are sold at an extremely discounted price. As an example, if I were to go upstairs to one of the public cafes or bars found around the building, I could be charged around £4 for a sausage roll, whereas I could get the same thing at the artist bar for £1. As I'm over the age of 18, I'm allowed to head to the artist bar if I want to buy some food. We are regarded as responsible enough to not blow anything up or get trapped in a tuber or other acts of stupidity. They are quite capable of a well-brewed cup of tea. Still don't know what brand they use, so I like to head down to make sure I don't decide to take a snooze on stage, something one of our tenors did a few years back during an actual performance. The show was to start at 1 PM, and we'd arrived early. It was 10:30 AM, so we had plenty of time. Because for some reason everyone tended to like being last minute, nobody around was really dressed, and likely wouldn't be until about 5 minutes until we were expected to be on, so I was wandering around in a shirt and jeans. I was caffeine deprived, so I decided to go get a cup of tea. All the other chaps are in the dressing room, being watched by the chaperones, so it's just me heading up to the artist bar. I remember it being frightfully quiet in the hall, which wasn't unexpected, but it was sort of chilly, which for some reason made me feel a little tense. I turned into the room and noticed a selection of people who were obviously older than myself wearing formal attire. It was of very brief interest to me because caffeine triumphed over anything interesting in my surroundings. I remember thinking that I felt like I was walking into the Overlook Hotel. I expected to be greeted by Jack Torrance at any moment. I also remember one gentleman wearing a tuxedo with a white bow tie, which was sort of weird because the orchestra commonly just wears plain black and the other choirs were doing the same. The gentleman was wearing what our conductor would be wearing, but he wasn't the conductor. I shrugged, got to the counter, and there were 2 girls there. What weirded me out more was the way they were sitting. There are 2 or so chairs usually on the left side of the bar, so whoever is on shift at the time doesn't need to stand infinitely. They are stationed at the left wall, so the servers aren't faced towards me, but I can see their faces. If I was a server, my customer would be forward, then right. Both girls are sat backs against chair, legs on the floor and their hands placed perfectly forward on both legs. There's a small smile on both their faces, but they are looking straight forward, not at me, but at the opposite wall. They look sort of like dolls, and they are sat in silence until I snap out of my bemusement and cough a little. Excuse me? One of the girls stands up. The way she moves is honestly ridiculously robotic. It's another thing that's a little disconcerting, because she first stands, walks forward, still smiling, then suddenly turns at a 90-degree angle to face me, in silence. Hi there, I was just hoping for some tea. Her smile widens, but when she speaks it's so monotone I lean back slightly in shock. Of course, sir. That will be £1. I hand her the coin, and as she turns to make the drink I realize how quiet the room is. I look around and turn to see that the people from earlier are just looking at each other. No talking, just sort of staring. Okay then. My drink is put in front of me. It's not exactly difficult to pour boiling water into a tea bag, so it really didn't take so long. I thank the girl, who is now just staring at me, walk over to the counter, lid off, pour a little milk in, lid on, and because I feel so uncomfortable I try to power walk out. I get out the room, and I'm about to turn back down the hallway to the dressing room, when I take a sip and my brain just goes back bloody hell, this needs sweetness. I'm maybe about 5 meters from the artist bar, facing away. Because the atmosphere felt so weird I had a very brief debate with myself about going back. The hallway is silent, I would hear if people were walking down the hall, so when I finally decide bugger it, I'll grab some sugar and leave. At best, a 15-second argument with my inner monologue. You can image my shock when I walk up to the doorway, and the room is dark as hell, because the lights are off. I poke my head in further, and turn my phone flashlight on. Nobody at the counter. Nobody at the tables. The room is bloody empty, and I heard nobody leave. There was no sign of anything. Unnerved beyond all else, I book it, somewhat gently. I'm not going to spill this drink no matter how spooked I may be. Back to my room. As I walk back in, I'm given a strange look by a chaperone. Where'd you get the drink from? Did you go up to the cafe? I'm confused. No, I just headed to the artist bar. Cue her confusion. The artist bar isn't open until 12 today. The saddest bit was I didn't get to finish my drink because we were called up for rehearsal and cold tea is just forbidden. I've never had anything similar happen with the artist bar. When I described the counter girls to one of the organizers at the event I was given a weird look and told nobody of that appearance was employed at the Albert Hall. I guess this isn't the story about what I saw in the forest that night, but rather what my dog saw. Or if you wish, what saw me. I love to tell creepy stories, but there's one I only tell if someone asks me about it, because they've heard from someone else I told it to them. I don't know how well it will translate to text, but here goes. I was out walking my dog in the forest late at night. This is not unusual or freaky, it's something I do a lot and enjoy. It's tranquil, soothing and just my dog and me. I'm not scared of the dark, the forest, and I have my dog with me. There are no dangerous wild animals where I live, and no bigger animals at all. I also do not scare easily. It was a cold day in October and you could see the stars well, and the moonlight was strong enough to light my path. I have a light, but I didn't need to use it. As I'm just walking minding my business, happy and enjoying myself, there is a sensation like if someone had cracked an egg filled with ice cold water on my head. That's the best way I can describe it. The cold runs down from the top of my head, down my whole body to my toes, and I'm instantly terrified. I get goosebumps all over, and I just know without any doubt in my mind that I'm in mortal danger. At the same time this feeling rushes over me. My dog who is walking in front of me has stiffened and turned towards the forest. His tail go low, his head and ears go low, and his mane rises like on an upset cat. I have never seen him do this before or since. Instead of his normal startled bark or the way he'd bark at a wild animal, he emits a low growl and stares intently at a space between some of the trees. I look the same direction as him, and I hear a voice in my head, clear as day, say don't look at it, because then it will know you are aware it's there. I've heard my crisis situation voice before, and it's always weird, having your brain speak to you like it's a different entity, but I do not need it to tell me a second time. I turn around and look for the quickest exit. My dog's inner crisis voice has not given him the same message, because he is fixed on the spot and refuses to move. I manage to yank him while he is still growling deeply, like I've never heard before, and I find a shortcut out of the forest. As soon as I pick up my speed and get my dog going, the wind picks up, and it is warm, and it carries with it a smell of fermented apples and rotten leaves. I hightail it out of there, running like I've never run before, and as soon as we get out of the forest my lungs basically give up. I have asthma, and running in dry air is not possible. I know that I'm safe out of the forest thought, but before I can get any ideas a voice in my head once again states keep moving and don't look. back. Fighting the instinct to not look back, I managed to drag myself and my poor dog away. When I get home, I lock the door, light every lamp in the house, and I don't turn them off until morning. I don't sleep either. I have no clue if it was just something in my brain that went let's become scared now, and my dog picked up on it, but still to this day it terrifies me. I always get goosebumps when I tell this story, and I have them now just from writing it out. Make of it what you will. I certainly can't explain it. My aunt passed away from a long-fought battle with brain cancer in April 2010. My grandmother is a very religious woman who had endured her husband, parents, sister and now her firstborn child passing away, and did so with a strength that I hope to possess one day. I myself am not overly religious. My grandmother knows and respects this, but will still often speak to me about God and Jesus, and how lucky our family is to be so emotionally close to one another, and even though some of them are gone, they are still with us. Jump forward 2 months after she passed. I was never overly close with my aunt, but I loved her very much, and her death had been weighing on me. I'm at work standing in a completely enclosed underground parking garage with a coworker smoking a cigarette, just talking about my aunt. Out of nowhere, something hit me dead center on the top of my head and fell between my feet. It was a golden coin with an angel printed on both sides. I had never seen it before, and my coworker was as shocked as I was. We both looked around the garage, but it was obvious we were the only two there, and had zero idea how in the world this coin materialized out of thin air. Later that night on my hour-plus drive home from work, I very narrowly avoided a multiple fatality accident by mere seconds. When I got home and researched the coin, still shaken up, I discovered it is supposed to represent a guardian angel. Believe what you will, but I believe that was my aunt's way of looking out for me and keeping me safe. She was letting me know she was still with me. Now, I never leave my house without the coin and I have it on me at all times. I like to think it's how she has kept me safe for the last 10 years and I'll never let it go. TLDR, a guardian angel coin fell out of the sky one day and I believe it was a sign from my deceased aunt, protecting me from a potentially fatal car accident the same night. This isn't the strangest thing that's happened, but it's the one that popped in my head right now. I was on a train with my youngest son coming home from the city after a doctor's appointment. My son was sitting in the seat front facing, while I was across from him facing back, so when people boarded I only saw their backs. An older woman gets on, and I immediately thought of my grandmother who died when I was 8 years old, which was decades ago, but I loved my grandmother with everything I had. Watching her walk down the aisle to a seat, it gave me goosebumps because of the way she walked, her hair color/style, her build was like seeing my memory become 3D. She took a seat only a few rows up from us and sat front facing, and when I saw her face, I felt like I had to pinch myself because holy cow did she have similar features to what I remember of my grandmother. Typing this out actually took longer than the whole board the train/notice the woman/took her seat/I made the observation than the real-time scenario. The ride is about an hour and a half, and every time I look up from my phone or tending to my son, I see this woman peeking through the seats that were in front of her staring at me. She would quickly look away, but it happened enough times that I became aware she was staring at me, and every now and then I would give one of those closed mouth smiles in that weird acknowledgement thing humans do. It turned out her stop was before where my son and I were to get off, and as most people do, she got up from her seat as the train was slowing to her stop. There were a couple of people ahead of her waiting to get off, so she ended up standing right next to me, and she tapped me on the shoulder and told me she didn't mean to keep staring at me, but she said she knew me and could not place it. I felt like I was looking through my 8-year-old eyes at my beloved grandmother almost 40 years later, but all I said was she looked familiar to me also. She kept looking at me intensely and insisted she knew me. She knew me, but couldn't place it, but she knew me, and said I was so familiar, and she knows she's interacted with me, but can't figure out where. Not being comfortable telling a complete stranger I was feeling some weird déjà vu, doppelganger as someone who's been gone for decades, and that I just wanted to hug her. I told her she looked familiar to me also. She kept looking into my eyes and I could see she was trying to place me, and I told her I have one of those faces that a lot of people always ask how they know me. Which is true, it happens consistently. As the train stopped and people started exiting, she pointed her finger in that grandmotherly way, smiled and said, I know you, and I'll probably remember later. Everyone from the train was exiting on the row side where my son and I were sitting, and I looked out the window, and she was stood on the platform by my window, and kept looking at me, and I smiled at her. My young son kept asking who that lady was, and why she was talking to me as the train pulled away, and we were waving at each other. I spent a year on a US Coast Guard law and transmitting station on Okinawa. This was an isolated duty station at the north end of the island. It was a 1-year tour, and there were about 25 crew members at the station. I was assigned as a law and watch stander doing 8-hour shifts. I was on midnight 8-timer watch when I heard a loud bang on the other side of the timers. There were 8 timers in 2 rows with my desk in between. The timers were about the size of a refrigerator with scopes and dials on the front for maintaining a microsecond delay on the navigation signals we received and sent. The noise came from the open area behind the timers that had a workbench against the wall where the ETs worked on equipment. Directly behind the A watch stander's desk was the door to the C timer room. To the right was the radio room, and then a door opening to a hall and leading to, as I remember, the garage area. At the end of the building was where the engineer watch stander hung out. Just next to that door leading out was a coffee area with a big coffee urn, and with a small galvanized trash can under it. When I heard the loud bang I jumped up and ran around the 8 timers and found that the metal trash can lid had come off the can and sailed across the room and hit the floor. I picked it up and walked over and put it back on. I opened the hall door and no one was around, so I rang up the M3 who was on watch, thinking he was bored and playing jokes to liven up the mid-watch. He answered on the first ring, so it couldn't have been him, as he couldn't have got back to his phone that fast. I went back to the desk and sat down pondering what had just happened, and within a minute or two, bang, it happened again. I stood up, walked around, and there was the lid on the floor. I put it back on the can again and went back to the desk. It then happened a third time. The metal trash can lid had flown 20 feet or so across the room and crashed on the floor. I went back around, picked it up, walked back to the coffee area, and was standing in front of the coffee urn when I heard a jangling sound. The spoons in the water glass next to the coffee urn were standing up and rattling back and forth in the glass. As I reached out and grabbed them, the salt shaker next to the coffee urn tipped over, the lid unscrewed as I watched it, and the salt ran out. I was by now more confused than scared, and figured I should let the sea watch stander know what was going on. As I cleared the row of 8 timers and had a view of my desk, the small plastic paper tray flew off the desk in the direction of the C timer room door and scattered papers all over the floor. It didn't just fall off the desk, but actually flew about 8 feet, as if it were thrown. I opened up the C timer room door, which we were not supposed to do, and told the C watch stander that stuff was flying all over the timer room. He said to call the ZO if I was having trouble, but shut the goddamn timer room door. I got on the phone again to the engineer, who woke up the ZO and told him what had happened. Within a few minutes, he showed up as I finished picking up the paper scattered all over the floor. The ZO came in a few minutes later. There wasn't much they could do, so they hung around for a few minutes, looking at me sideways. The N3 went back to his watch and the ZO went back to bed. Nothing more happened that night or any other night after that I stood watch. I'm pretty sure that it couldn't have been a practical joke. When I got up the next morning and went to the mess hall at noon for my breakfast, the story had gotten around by then that I was seeing things in the timer room, and I was ribbed by everyone in the mess hall for having been drunk or smoking funny tobacco on watch, which certainly wasn't the case. I've seen 2 rather strange things that I can't quite explain. Here's one of them. So our house is built on a hill, so the front of the house is at ground level, but the back of the house is a height of 1 floor level above the ground as the hill slopes down. On the back of the house is our bedroom, a bathroom and a hallway leading from the rest of the house by the bedroom and to an exit out the back. This back door opens onto an elevated deck and a set of stairs leading to the backyard at the end of the deck, with a motion detector floodlight pointed at the stairs, so the light comes on when anyone goes down the stairs at night. Our backyard is a fair size, with a longest mowed yard, and at the end of it a strip of land that we just allow to grow up wild, and at the end of that is a barbed wire fence, and beyond the fence is a large amount of open pasture land owned at the time by my dad, who rented it out for farmland. We have always had 2 dogs, and at the time we had a German Shepherd and a Boxer. They were both good dogs and well trained. We had trained them to go out into that strip of unmowed grassy land between our mowed yard and the fence line and do their business when they had to. We always let them outside to do their business right before we go to bed, and immediately after we get up in the morning. We open the back door and they go out into the strip of field and do their biz and then come back and wait at the door to come back in, unsupervised. We have a pair of little dog bed pads beside our bed, and usually the dogs sleep all night and don't need to go out until the morning. But occasionally, maybe once or twice a year, one will have a stomach problem or some issue and need to go out in the middle of the night, so they come around to my side of the bed and wake me up in one way or another as I'm a light sleeper. So this one night our German Shepherd woke me up by pacing back and forth by my side of the bed and panting loudly. I get up and quietly open the bedroom door with the dogs following me, turn on the outside light from the hallway and open the outside door and let the dogs out. I think nothing of it as they are good well-trained dogs as I mentioned, so I never worry about them and just let them go. I close the door and wait inside for a few minutes, petting the cats and filling up their food until I think our German Shepherd has finished her business. I open the door, expecting to see the dogs waiting at the door, but they aren't, so I step outside onto the deck and look out to the strip of land where the dogs usually go. There is just enough light between the backlight outside the door and the light spilling out from the light above the stairs to just barely see the dogs in the field. Except there is another dog there. I squint in the dark, trying to see better. A large white or very light colored dog is standing between our German Shepherd and Boxer. Our dogs standing on either side of the strange dog, standing equidistant from the dog and facing it, the white dog facing the German Shepherd. They are frozen, unmoving. I find myself blinking, squinting, subconsciously leaning forward trying to get a better look as I watch for a few seconds, and they still don't move. Now, having a strange dog show up in the night is very unusual here as people don't let their dogs run around free in this area, but not impossible or anything, just unusual. But the dogs standing completely motionless is pretty weird. Both our dogs as well as a strange dog is very odd and very not dog-like, as anyone with dogs knows. Our dogs would not attack another dog, never, but the dogs would be smelling each other's as and probably smelling each other all over, or running around, or walking around each other maybe. Our German Shepherd would be barking, and definitely running around, or at worst keeping a distance, something. But the 3 dogs are just standing there the same distance from each other without any sound or movement whatsoever, giving me such a pause that I just stared, waiting for them to do something. Finally, I backed up into the house and quickly went into the bedroom and grabbed my uber super bright flashlight and ran back out. Back outside I flashed the light out onto the yard and at the strip of land, seeing the dogs running back across the yard like they normally, no sign of another dog. I swept the light back and forth across the yard and field, left and right, nothing. Then I pointed it out into the pasture beyond the fence, as a careful dog could get under the fence if they were careful, maybe lose some fur if they weren't, but nothing. I stepped to the handrails of the deck and pointed the light down as the dogs ran up the stairs, still half expecting a strange dog to be following them, or somewhere in the yard, or running across it and away. Nothing. So I'm standing there as the dogs come up the stairs, the dogs acting totally normal and looking up at me and expecting me to open the door and let them back in. I said something like what the hell was that? Or something, expecting them to be acting excited as they usually would after meeting a strange dog on their property. Nope. I stood there, waving the flashlight back and forth across the yard and field beyond. I remember at one point, while I was standing there, that our German Shepherd glances from staring at me and looks out toward the field, then back at me. Not so unusual as she is perfectly perceptible enough to understand that I was looking in a certain direction and pointing the flashlight there, but it still added to the mystique of the situation. Of course, since it was the middle of the night and thoughts are more likely to go in that direction, my first thought was ghost dog or some such. Maybe a ghost of our previous dog or something. Despite me totally not believing in ghosts and crap like that, etc. I quickly discounted that, forcing my mind to something more rational. So I take the dogs back in and eventually, after quite a while, fall back asleep. Was it just an unusual situation, where a dog had wandered along right at the time the dogs were out, or saw them and wandered over, combined with a weird idiosyncrasy of dog psychology? Was I asleep? It sure didn't seem like it in any way, and my flashlight was along the side of the bed instead of on the table by my bed, where it usually is. I suppose to some people this isn't that unusual, but between the white/light colored dog and all of the dog's unusual frozen lack of reaction to each other, the whole situation just kinda freaked me out, and has always puzzled me. Late to the party, but here is my story. I was 15 or 16, and we'd just experienced a time change, so it was darker than usual as I walked to the bus stop on a Monday morning. My house was at the top of a hill, and had a common driveway, and ran parallel to one of the driveways of a neighboring house. Between these two driveways was roughly 20 meters of yard and a row of citrus trees that blocked, but did not entirely obscure the view of the other driveway. While my driveway was paved, this was gravel. As I'm making my way to the bus stop, I look over and see the silhouette of a person standing between one of the fruit trees. I don't think much of it, because my neighbor often hired laborers to help her with her garden, and several of them lived in the neighborhood itself, so it was not uncommon to see them walking early in the morning like I was. However, when I get to the bottom of the driveway, I turn to look up the road and the figure is standing barely a few meters away from me, and all I can see is the deepest black shadow. No features, depth or detail. It was like someone has cut out the blackest part of the night sky and left it as a cutout in the middle of the road. While it was early in the morning, it wasn't so dark that I wouldn't be able to see a face or some clothing from that far away, but there was nothing. On top of that, if it was the same figure I had seen between the trees, they would have had to sprint to stand where they were in that moment, and I would have heard them moving across the gravel. But it was a super quiet morning, probably 6 AM, and I hadn't heard a thing. I slowly turned around and started making my way down the hill to the bus stop with my heart in my throat, but when I looked over my shoulder a few seconds later to see if it followed, it had disappeared. I still have no idea what I saw that day, but all I know is that it wasn't a person. Thankfully, I have not seen it since. I had a consecutive series of dreams that were all linked together over the course of some time. Didn't remember how far apart they were, but it wasn't all in one night. Maybe a couple of weeks. The first dream was the shortest. In it, I was sitting by a creek at my parents' house at night. Behind me, the entire sky was taken up by a massive blue comet with a huge trailing tail. I looked forward and the sky in front of me above my parents' house was filled with stars. But they were off. They were all visibly yellow and arranged into shapes and designs, some of them resembling flowers. Then the flower shapes started to rotate, and other stars moved in conjunction, as if the whole sky was some kind of unfathomably large machine. The second dream was at night at my parents' house again. I was surrounded by what felt like 100 people outside in the driveway, but they didn't feel like dream people. It felt like I was surrounded by actual people. Like, I think I was lucid at this point, but I'm not sure. Everyone was quiet and looked really confused and scared. Like a bunch of dreaming people congregated in a single dream. Anyway, I looked up, and the stars in the sky were yellow again, and arranged in shapes, and moving like a machine. One star began to glow brighter and brighter, and then it fell from the sky and the light went into my parents' house. I pushed past people to get inside, and inside there are two beings, both with snow white skin and hair with black eyes and a black jewel on their foreheads. One was a beautiful woman and the other a floating child wrapped in a white cloth. The walls then began to glow and show me beautiful landscapes of some place I don't know. Mountains and fields, etc. The light faded, and I was back outside with the other people. They all had a quiet, but pleased look on their faces. I too felt what they were feeling, and when I woke up that morning, the only way I could describe the feeling I had then was all questions have been answered. Final dream was a bit stranger. I remember being on a bus or train at night riding away from a city. There were lots of people on board including my family. Everyone was mumbling and scared. No stars were visible in the sky this time. I look out the window towards the city lights, and in the blink of an eye, as fast as turning on a light switch, a massive object appeared over the city. It was a cubical hourglass shape with a half circle over one end. It floated at an angle above the city, and every inch of it glowed in shifting neon colors. As soon as it appeared, people on the bus/train started screaming in terror at this incomprehensible thing that suddenly appeared. From the object a bright white light began to approach us. It was clear that it was several objects flying closely together in an almost diamond formation. Each glowing object was sharp and bird-shaped. And as they approached, and their light became more blinding, someone on bus/train shouted in a terrified voice, "It's the angels." Then the white light engulfed my vision, and I was suddenly standing in a city park at night. The street lights were on and a few yards away a beautiful woman in a white dress was standing there. Her skin and hair were snow white and her eyes black. She held out a ring and said, "Marry into this power and humanity will change forever." Somehow I thought humanity should have its own chance to change. That I had no right to make that change or something. A blinding light filled my vision, then faded, and I was back on the bus/train. Everyone was no longer in hysterics. They were all smiling and quiet, like the people in the previous dream. My mother turned her head to look at me, and in the most at ease voice said, "You refused." I look out the window and the bus/train is going into a big bunker/military base built into a dam. The massive glowing object is now hovering directly over the base, but its shape is slightly changed now. It's vertical with the half circle at the top, but the bottom of the hourglass shape is now tapered down into a spindly, inverted cross. The bus/train enters the base and the dream ends. Weirdest part, I was watching Ancient Aliens on History Channel sometime after. And some crazy lady was talking about being visited by little grey men. She talked about her experience with them, but one part stood out. She said they showed her beautiful landscapes of a faraway place. She drew lots of pictures of the encounters, but one of them immediately caught my eye. It was of two beautiful people with snow white skin and hair with black eyes and a black jewel on their forehead. Just like in my dream. But I didn't see it on TV until after I had the dream.